Ooh, hello my friends, hope you are well. Today I'm back in action with another video in my Kitbashing Swamperial Guard army build, and this time I'll be whipping up a little Lord Solar Proxy, because let's be real, this guy he's just not the one. So let's get into it.
Swamp miniatures.
Now, at the end of my last Swamperial Guard video, I said,
while these guys will be the main bulk of our forces, we will have some units built from other swamp creatures coming to join the fight, and I think it's about time to introduce our first unit of these.
and I'm sorry to say, but
The lie detector determined that was a lie.
I did intend to bring in our first non-green boy units in this video, but then I got really excited about this idea I had for my Lord Solar Proxy, and so yeah, we're doing that instead. Please address all complaints to my butthole. Lord Solar Leontus is the Lord Commander of the Astra Militarum, which basically means he's a big old important boy, you know, he's the big cheese. And in the actual tabletop game, he's a very useful unit to have in your Imperial Guard army. The miniature itself though looks a bit shit and doesn't really fit visually with the rest of the units, which is the reason why so many people, including myself, build a proxy version instead. And my inspiration for this build is the Iwo Jima flag raising photo, because I've always been interested in military history, and the idea of posing some little green swampy army men to recreate this moment just sounds like a good time to me. So as you've just seen, I've started this build off by creating an old rotten swampy tree stump shape for them to stand on using some XPS foam, some offcuts of wire and some hot glue. Once that was looking suitably swampy, I covered the entire thing with some of my homemade mud mixture to give it a nice rough texture as always, and put that aside to dry while I got to work on the miniatures. I thought I'd tackle the flag first as an easy little warm up for the main action, and I had this one left over from an old command squad, but it needed a couple of adjustments to match what I had in mind. The first was to remove all traces of its former wielder, so I clipped off the arm and then used the hobby knife to shave away the hand, and after a bit of filing and sanding, it was like they were never there. The second adjustment was to lengthen the pole because we'd all like a longer pole, am I right fellas? And for this, plan A was to drill out the centre of the styrene rod and marry the two pieces together for some nice pole on pole action, which did work until it broke because I was playing with it too vigorously. So plan B was to drill out both the flag and the rod and connect them together with a pin made from some paperclip, which was way stronger than the previous bond, and I should have just done this to start with. I also slimmed down the pole a bit so it wouldn't look too thick and out of proportion with our miniatures, and this puppy was now ready for a waving. Up next, I'm getting to work on the trooper who'll be planting this flag into the ground, which was probably the most intricate part of this build. And for all of the following miniatures, I'll be using parts from these leftover Cadian shock troopers, some Gretchen, some Snotlings, and some older leftover Cadian pieces. The pose for this guy was really important as I wanted to really sell the effects that he was shoving the flag down into the ground. So after trimming away some areas of these legs and torso, I attached the pieces together with some green stuff, which allowed me to pose them as if he was twisting downward. After that, I needed to whip up a bit of a custom left arm for this fella, because I didn't have one that would be suitable, so I drilled into this little shoulder stump I'd added and glued in a piece of paperclip. Once I'd bent that into the rough driving arm shape, I covered it with some green stuff to bulk it out and gave it a quick shaping. For the left arm, I first trimmed away some of the body so it could sit more naturally on the torso, made a few snippy adjustments to the arm itself, and attached it quite low down to line up with the left one. I used a bit more green stuff to bulk out the upper arm portion, and also used this little armor plate to cover it all up, which worked pretty well. I then added a quick Gretchen head in place using some more green stuff to cover up the hole in the back, and I was now feeling brave enough to actually attach the flag to the miniature. I glued the pole to the torso first, being careful to line it up with the ends of each wrist, as I thought this would make adding the hands a bit easier in a moment. Both the hands were chopped off of some Cadian arms earlier, and the first one felt like it was meant to be, as it just fit around the pole without any real adjustments needed. The second one though did need a bit of adjusting, so I cut out the grenade it was holding and folded it down so it could wrap around the shaft. Oi oi. I glued it into place, gave myself a quick pat on the back because I was feeling proud of how natural it looked, and then used yet more green stuff to add a little cuff and hide the joint between the wrists and hands, and also add some texture on the left arm so it looked like cloth and not like a weird little slug. To finish off our little flag painter, I stuck a lasgun to his backpack, then added a fun little Cadian cap to keep his bonds warm. It looked like the lasgun was kind of floating though, so I added some straps because we're all about realism in this human swamp creature hybrid army build. And there we go, finito. I was really pleased with this little guy actually. It was definitely worth the extra effort, kit bashing him to match with the pose I wanted, and I can now build up my other miniatures quickly. These remaining miniatures didn't need as much work as our previous ones to get into good shape. I just did a bit of hand snipping and body trimming to attach the arms to 2 more shock troopers, with the first of them having both hands up in the air to assist with raising the pole, and the second one coming in with a lowered rifle and 1 hand in the air to assist with the pole work. They both got cheeky Gretchen heads so their neck holes wouldn't be lonely, and this one got a lasgun on his back too, which lined up with the straps on his armor. Also, both of these boys needed a helmet to denote their soldierly status, so I clipped off the bottom half of some leftover infantry helmets, drilled them out, and filed them down so they'd fit over the ears. And can you guess what I did for these guys next? Yeah, you got it, more green stuff to fill in any gaps that arose around the helmets or when posing the arms in this untraditional manner. I felt like it wouldn't have been a Swamperial Guard build without having some smaller green boys around too, so I built up this little Gretchen officer and changed his arms a couple of times until I was happy with the pose. I also built up 2 little snotlings, with 1 to hide down in the hole in the base I dug out earlier and 1 to sit on top of this flag. Just don't think about the physics of it too much. I spent a little while working out where to place my miniatures when they were finished, as it's always good to be prepared, and then it was time to slap down some sweet, sweet paint. If you've watched any of my previous Swamperial Guard videos, then you should be quite accustomed to the paint scheme I use on them. And I don't want to rehash it every single time I do a video on them, as it gets quite boring seeing and hearing the same stuff all the time. And it's probably boring hearing me say the same spiel about not repeating the paint job in every video I do, because it'd be boring to watch. It's basically like Inception, but I'm in a speech about being boring, in another speech about being boring, or something like that, you know, whatever. Check out the first Swamperial Guard video if you want to see the painting rationale in a bit more detail, but I think it's all the same now pretty much, with the only change being that I'm now using Carrack Stone to highlight the fatigues instead of whatever fractionally different colour I was using before. My favourite bit of this painting process is always the skin, as it's satisfying to build up some bright layers, and I get to paint tiny little butt cheeks sometimes, which is always a bonus. Then I just paint on the last little details of the eyes and insignias and whatnot, and all of a sudden it's time to paint the flag. I wanted this to match up with the colours of the uniforms, but look a little bit more polished maybe, so after applying a nice rich base coat of Shyish purple and Azerius purple mixed together, I attempted to add some volumetric highlights to the areas I thought would be catching the light. I used a few different paints in different combinations here, being Xerius purple, Gene Stealer purple, and also some Emperor's Children pink, and it's hard to give a distinct breakdown of exactly what happened, as I did a lot of back and forth with these colours to try and get things relatively smooth. And sometimes I'd be kind of stippling, other times I'd be kind of glazing, and it was all just one big hodgepodge of aggressively mediocre painting. But it didn't look too bad in the end, so winner, chicken spinner. Next up, I applied some Carrack Stone to the little details on the inner flag, like this star thing, whatever it is, and the little scroll bits with the skulls getting a base coat of ash grey instead. I then used some Agrak Surfshade around the edges of all these components to kind of line them in, and this helped a lot actually, because they were looking a bit flat beforehand, but the lining gave them a more three-dimensional appearance and helped to separate them from each other. I highlighted the skulls with some Ulthuan Grey and then used some Screaming Skull to add a bit more pizzazz to the Carrack Stone areas I did a moment ago. I decided to leave the scrolls blank for now, as I couldn't decide on what to write on them and wanted to make sure I was being consistent with my army, so I'll fill those in another day whenever I can decide on something thematic. To finish the flag off, I painted in the little insignias. The trim of the flag got the same Carrack Stone, Agrak Surfshade and Screaming Skull treatment as the other areas, the purity seal got a pretty standard touch up, and the dangly tassely bits did too. I added some gold on the decorative thing up top by our snotling boy, and finally hit the pole itself with some Rhinoxide and Mornfang brown. And the painting for our miniatures was now complete, minus any little touch-ups and tidying I'll do off camera. As always, I'm pretty happy with how these guys are looking, and surprisingly I'm not bored of painting with the same paint scheme yet. I think there's always a risk when you're doing whole armies that you get really bored and sick of doing the same paint jobs, but as of yet I'm not feeling that boredom, and I quite enjoy being able to just turn off mentally and start slapping on paint in a very familiar scheme. It's quite meditative, and it's probably one of the reasons this hobby is such a good outlet for myself and for others. So yeah, go paint some minis today while I paint my base. Now, to give my rotten old swampy tree stump a correspondingly swampy paint job, I started by dry brushing on a few different layers of paint to build up some definition. I started with a more traditional brown colour and then mixed in some more grey each time until I was using a nice damp, muddy, earthy colour. Next, I began the mossification of the stump using a whole bunch of different green colours with a mixture of stippling and regular brushwork to build up a layered mossy look. And it does look like I'm going a bit over the top with this at this point, but it comes together in the end, and if you're doing something similar, you can just dry brush on some more of your original base colour to tone down the moss a bit. I then slosh on some washes using some Nuln Oil and Agrax Surfshade in a fairly random manner, just basically adding some little splashes of this wherever feels good, and dabbing away the excess with some tissue so I don't oversaturate the area. My penultimate ingredient is this trusty swamp goo, which is funny because I hated this stuff the first time I used it, but I really like it now. I think you just need to use it in the right way, so for me I'm dabbing on a thin layer of this stuff around all the roots at the bottom of the base and also on the sides and surface of the stump itself to build up a nice glossy, moist, swampy effect. Finally, I add some little tufts scattered around for some bursts of plant growth, and then go a bit nuts adding this foliage stuff using some PVA glue. I try not to go too over the top with this, but I do feel like a rotten old tree stump might be a good place for new plant life to start sprouting, so I don't know, let me know whether you think this is a bit too much or not. The base gets its customary rim job using some Steel Legion drab to match the rest of our units so far, and I add our miniatures in place ready for the final shots. So, my friends, what do you think? Pretty good or pretty not good? I don't know. I'm quite happy with this build actually. As usual, I could sit here and point out a bunch of things I don't like about it or things I could have done better, you know. I think we're all our own harshest critics when it comes to our own work, but as a whole, this is pretty close to the image I had in my head when I started the build, so that's a win for me. I'm really pleased with how the base came out especially. I've made some swampy, mossy tree stumps like this before on a smaller scale, but this was my first time doing a larger one, and I think it works really well as the foundation for our miniatures to lay their claim on the swamp lands, but what do you guys think? I also really enjoyed the building work I had to do for this video, especially on the main flag planting miniature. It did take a bit longer than I expected, but in the end it was definitely worth it because I think his pose gives a nice dynamic effect overall. It was also really exciting and enjoyable for me to come back to the Swamperial Guard army now, as it's probably been a couple of months since I've last built anything for it, and I was definitely starting to have some withdrawal symptoms, so yeah, it feels good to come back and make more progress to my overall goal of 2,000 points of pure Kitbash swampy chaos, and I'll be coming back soon. As always though, my friends, if you enjoyed this video then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. Let me know what you think of this build, and also let me know whether you'd spend 3 hours a day as a fish if someone gave you £1 million. For now though, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.